This is 10 years hence. Our speaker this morning comes to us from the western suburbs of Chicago, and having braved the toll road, we're delighted he's made it. Michael J. Schierl is founder of Immaculata and is a graduate of the University of Notre Dame, and in particular, he is proud to say the PLS program. Among those on campus who still read, we're delighted to have him back. He's also a graduate of Harvard Law School. Mr. Schierl has an extensive background structuring and implementing sophisticated financing for both the for-profit and the not-for-profit world. Mr. Schierl practiced law for several years in New York with Dewey Ballantine, a major international law firm, where he completed a variety of taxable and tax-favored transactions involving for-profit entities, including structured financings, public and private offerings, as well as mergers and acquisitions. Mr. Schierl is also the founder of Julius Capital Partners, a Chicago-based fundraising consulting firm, and Julius Capital Services, a Chicago-based business consulting and insurance services company. In collaboration with Immaculata, the Julius Capital entities enable Mr. Schierl to provide cutting-edge turnkey funding solutions for Catholic nonprofit organizations. Mr. Schierl has become a recognized leader in the Catholic community for his work in developing sophisticated conduit bond financing structures, especially optimized for Catholic dioceses and religious orders, including the Flex Design Deposit and Loan Program and the Flex Design Endowment Funding Program. He is a licensed member of the bar in New York, Illinois, and Wisconsin. Mr. Schierl lives in LaGrange Park, Illinois with his wife Valerie and their 5 children. He is proudly a former resident of Dillon Hall. Welcome back to campus, if you would please, Michael Schierl.
Your mission, if you should choose to accept it, is to, over the next 60 minutes, look at an audacious plan already in place to create a new Catholic financial ecosystem. I'm hoping at the end of this, before you accept, in 60 minutes, that you'll ask the hardest questions you can think of before you think of joining in. So, until then, we'll give you the information you need to decide. Now there's a 10-year plan here, so you don't have to decide immediately, but think hard about it during the 60 minutes we have. So, the 10-year hence objective. We've been asked to speak in this speaker series about social impact investing. We're here to talk about Catholic impact investing, in particular, a new form of Catholic impact bond. It's an audacious goal we have in place, but we've already been in the field for several years and we have several pieces in place. We're looking for people maybe watching this to help us fill in some of the gaps over time, but in 10 years we hope to do something enormous for the Catholic Church in the area of impact investing. So, the simple goal we've taken upon ourselves is to build a new Catholic financial ecosystem. What are we going to need to accomplish that? Well, we're going to need a whole new set of Catholic dioceses and foundations able to issue Catholic conduit bonds for us. We'll explain what those are. We're also going to need a new form of mortgage bond. Taking the current deposit and loan programs the dioceses have, we need a new conduit mortgage bond that will be secure from bankruptcy risk and can fund enormous campus expansion for parishes around the country. We're going to need a whole new kind of bond called a Flex Endowment Bond to go with a whole new kind of campaign called a Flex Endowment Campaign. We'll find out more about that. But we're going to endow as we build rather than plan to endow later and then never get to it. We're going to need a whole new breed of Catholic institutions and foundations who are audaciously brave enough to invest in our Catholic impact bonds, rather than a watered-down Catholic socially acceptable investment screening. Why not have a pure play investment opportunity directly in the building of the church? Let's invest what we're for rather than try to not invest what we're against. And we're going to need parishioners who can become balance sheet philanthropists. They can build their own parish campus simply using the investments they have, if we can create the right kind of investment for them to invest in. In order to kind of prove that we have a new Catholic financial ecosystem, we're going to need some scale. So as our simple test, we'll see whether we can put together $1 billion of new Catholic impact bonds over the next 10 years and place them. Fortunately, we're not starting from scratch. We're going to build upon a model initially developed by St. Maximilian Kolbe called Marytown. Born just a mile or two away from John Paul II in Poland, he came up with a concept and had the largest Catholic campus out in, it's called Niepokalanów in Poland, and we're going to build upon that. Unfortunately, his life was cut short when he, in the concentration camps, traded places with a prisoner, and he left the rest of that work to us. Now, in order to have $1 billion, we're going to need to figure out how to have a model that's scalable and replicable. So what we've adopted is we need to have 10 million, perhaps in average, on a campus improvement project. And then we're going to need to move to a $30 million senior care facility add-on in order to come around to our fully integrated wounded tomb Catholic campus with a parish, a church, and a senior living facility where people can stay in their community, support each other, and basically it's a new form of neo-monasticism, I guess. We're going to move backwards to create a Catholic financial community, self-funded. Well, in order to achieve this audacious goal, we're going to have to adopt a mission possible mentality. Fortunately, we have a very good helper, and we are at Our Lady's University. And so we're going to absolutely need to depend on Our Lady. Because if there's anyone that can do the impossible, she's been there and done it. With her helping us, we're going to be able to achieve this. Now, personally, and my firms are consecrated to Our Lady. You here at Notre Dame, Our Lady's University, have a power that you have no idea what it can do if you truly adopt it. I've done it, it's working for our firms. Ask for her help. And we're going to ask for some of her helpers who have similarly consecrated themselves. This has got to be a part of the new evangelization. And we look to John Paul II, John Paul the Great, consecrated to Our Lady, totus tuus, totally yours. Secret to, I think, what he was able to do. We then need to look to St. Max himself. He's the one who went, I think, deepest with the consecration. The form that we have taken is the become a part of the Militia Immaculata. Now, you don't have to do that, but I tell you, it sure helps. The Marytown concept was something that was working back before it was cut short, and we're going to pick up the threads of that. Now, we're going to look to Scripture for a few lessons that I think should power our mentality here. When you look at the parable of the talents, what I'm going to take away from that, and I'm sure you all recall, the 3 gentlemen, one was given 5, one was given 2, and one was given 1 talent. Well, when the master returned, the one that invested the 5 was the one that was highly praised. He doubled down, and he did what was asked. Now, the one who buried the 1 talent in the ground, essentially what our church is doing now by burying its land, the equity in its land in the ground, that one was not treated. He was taken outside and severely treated. I think we should go with the 5 talent mentality. 5 loaves and 2 fish. There was another extraordinary situation, call it impossible. And I think the lesson we take there is we do not need to have all the answers, but we need to bring what we have. So bring it. The old lady and the coin. In terms of, these are all financial scriptural lessons I'm looking at, but the most highly praised giver of all in Scripture was the old lady who put the single coin. She was the one giving from her sacrificial giving. She was the one that's the model. So let's use a model that has the parable of the talents, the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and the old lady in the coin. So what are our 5 loaves and 2 fish at the Catholic Church? I hear everyone complaining it's impossible, we can't do this, all the problems. Come on, what do we have to bring? We have 186 dioceses, each who are latent public municipalities, capable of issuing freely tradable Catholic bonds. We have land. We're the largest landholder in the whole world, Catholic churches. We have interest rates that are at historical lows. We have 70 million U.S. Catholics. They give $9 billion a year. And the majority of that is from only 7% of them. Low-hanging fruit. And what we really have is seniors. Sometimes looked as a liability. There's a power in our seniors that we have not touched. Now, we're in the midst of the largest intergenerational transfer of wealth in the history of the entire world. And we have the most seniors who are devoted to our cause. We're not actually entering this with our hands tied behind our back. And the issue that's facing seniors is actually the solution to all of our problems. They're fixed income seniors suffering from low interest rates now. So on fixed income and you're earning nothing from your CD or your treasury bills, you're really suffering. You're afraid of possibly outliving your money. But if we could, in there you have substantial possible assisted living needs, so you're saving up from that. Basically you're frozen from giving if asked in the wrong way. But if you were asked to give estate gifts or to invest in Catholic impact bonds, and perhaps upon your death donate the bond back, I think that would be a highly attractive possibility. We're going to use these elements to determine the course of our funding strategy. We need to build off what we have. We're going to need a Mission Possible team. We're not starting from scratch, but we certainly need a lot of joiners. Let's see what we're starting off with. We do have my firm, Julius Capital, consecrated to Our Lady, and has developed a very innovative flex endowment bond that I think is a key to be able to do the impact that we're looking at here. It's a way to invest in endowment. Now, Notre Dame is doing some similar things right now with their charitable remainder trusts and their endowment units, and we can do a similar thing down at the parish level. We have it in place, we have a success story, and we're ready to replicate. We have a law firm, my law firm, consecrated to Our Lady as well. We've developed some of the most sophisticated conduit bond structures, I think, even back from my New York days. I'd compare it to anything that's out there now. We have the largest Catholic bond underwriter in the country. Walt Coughlin is here with us. Walt Coughlin is over here, and this is the 19th largest investment bank in the country, and one since 1932 doing Catholic bonds. Has never had a bad deal. We have U.S. Bank as a bond trustee. We've done 30 to 40 deals with this team here, and we have U.S. Bank. Keith Henselin from U.S. Bank is over here on the side. We also have a world-class actuary that has done opinions to show our estate gift modeling and the death benefit on our policies to show how to make a good bond, Value Life Corporation. We have Catholic Order of Foresters that's issuing insurance policies for us. And I'd like to also say that we have Cornerstone Charitable Foundation, many members of which are here, that is now currently an active national Catholic bond issuer and has succeeded now in doing bond issuances of both mortgage and flex endowment bonds for another diocese. I'd be remiss in talking about some of my colleagues here too. Chris Ritten is in the front row here as the president of Julius Capital. I think I have Terry, Chris, and Peter White who are with Immaculata here. And before we get in deeper, I'd also say that some of you might have received one of my business cards with a USB. There's much deeper information on these cards that I can cover in this talk, but all the case studies in more depth are available on my business card. Cornerstone is something that I have to talk about. I will talk about it more, but I will tell you that we have a world of respect for this group in Kansas that's, I think, cracked the code on what we need to do here. They've created their own flex endowment. I'll tell you more about that later. And they're now successfully issuing bonds for other parishes and other dioceses. We also have with us a world-class set of dioceses, innovative dioceses, that have been brave enough to let us try some of these experiments. Initially, it takes a lot of, in the church, you got to be quite brave to try something new. They really don't want to do it unless someone else is. So that's a little bit of a problem. Everything we've done, it's been the first one. So we need to have a group with incredible fortitude to attempt to do the right thing inside the church. And I would start with Diocese of Phoenix. Joe Anderson is a PLS graduate as well. And he's the CFO of the Diocese of Phoenix, and he's developed the first Catholic Conduit mortgage bond. His brother Tony, Father Tony, was also a priest. He's a priest with the SALT, is a PLS grad as well. We have the Diocese of Lexington, and we have with us Deacon Bill Wakefield and his wife Schierl. Deacon Bill is the CFO of Lexington and a courageous man who I deeply respect in all fronts, financial and on the spiritual side. And we have the Archdiocese of Dubuque. We won't talk much about that right now in this talk, but they have the only current flex endowment capable Catholic foundation, capable of doing everything we'll talk about today. And we've successfully had their foundation approved by the IRS in the midst, it turns out, of the witch hunt going on against Catholic nonprofits. We've successfully had this structure approved at the IRS. So onward. I think we've got a good team and we're looking for more. But at least we have a replicatable whole that can now be moving around the country, we believe. Well, in order to succeed though, we have, in addition to a mission mentality, we need a new funding paradigm. The funding paradigm we have right now, which I'll briefly put on the board, is basically driven by a scarcity mentality. Almost everything we're doing now is contra to the parable of the talents and the 5 loaves and 2 fish. It's all about shrinking and protecting and not trying. But we are. The Lord said to Peter, "You're a rock, and on this rock I'll build my church. And the gates of hell will not prevail against it." It means we're not shrinking, we're taking the land. If we're crashing down the gates of hell, we cannot be shrinking and selling off our church patrimony. So the paradigm we have right now, which we're going to flip on its head, is a scarcity mentality paradigm. We start off with how to fund operations. We have an operational shortfall, so let's shrink. Lay off staff. Sell assets. Hand it on to the next guy. We also then never get to the capital campaign because you're too busy handling the shortfalls. And when we do get to a capital campaign, it's a reactive arm-twisting campaign out of it's almost to the point where you can't do anything else, and then you twist everyone's arm, then you have recurring donor fatigue, then they're waiting for the next time, and you've never solved the problem. And you never get to endowment, which is the real way to solve this. It's a big endowment. But we never get to it, and if you have a scarcity mentality, you will never get to it. What we need to do is flip this on its head and adopt an abundance mentality type of approach. If you look at the Eucharist, if you look at the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and you bring what you have, you cannot fail. What we need is endowment. We need to do it first. We need an endowment bond. We need to endow before we build. At latest, while we build. Secondly, and so we will see that we have a bond that will enable that to be done so we can begin building endowment and not waiting. We need to then build structures. We need to expand the campus and upgrade our facilities. And we would do capital with our new type of asset-protected mortgage bond. In addition, then, we need to even expand operations if we are adding a senior facility, we need to find some outside financing for that, of which is readily available for those kind of projects if properly positioned. So this is a new funding paradigm that we'll use. Now what this all adds up to, and the key to this, you might have noticed I use the word bonds a lot. The key to it is bonds. And the key to it is to take advantage of what I call the Catholic municipality opportunity. If you look at the 186 dioceses around the country, they're a lot like the municipalities. And what do I mean by that? And you'll find out that if you're a municipality, you can issue tax-exempt bonds, which we'll find out actually aren't as good as they seem, but it's the same structure that we can use. So what is a Catholic municipality? Catholic diocese is like a municipality. We need a geographic border. We have it, 186 dioceses. We need taxing power. We effectively have it. A diocese does certain functions centrally, and they have an assessment, and they have the equivalent of a taxing power. And we need a secret sauce item that we do have, a 501c3 in the midst who's an issuer. Well, we have the dioceses, we have the Catholic foundations, we have all kinds of 501c3 issuer entities, both in the diocese level and national. So we have the opportunity to become a Catholic municipality and to integrate this process around the whole country. The dioceses can serve as conduit issuers and thereby ensure the fidelity to canon law and other kind of, not contrary to the faith conditions inside any bond that's issued under a diocese. We also have national opportunities for that. We need to create Catholic taxable bonds. Now everyone is so brainwashed with the tax exempt feature, got to be tax exempt. It really is a little bit of a boiling the frog in the water problem. You have a very small advantage on the interest rate, almost negligible now that interest rates are so low, and it comes with a heap of strings that force you to do things that aren't Catholic. And you can't fund several things if you're using a tax-exempt bond where the issuer is a municipality. But if the issuer is a Catholic 501c3, you can not have any contrary to the faith requirements. You can actually build a church. Tax-exempt bond can't build a church. Catholic school that uses a tax-exempt bond has to put a cloak over the crucifix. You can't have a chapel. All of these kind of things come as baggage with a municipal taxable bond, tax-exempt bond. But with a taxable bond, a Catholic impact bond, what we have is a secured bond, immunizing bondholders from diocesan bankruptcy risk. We have a flexible instrument that can be invested in anything, not just a Catholic school, but a church, or a school, or an endowment. It can be secured by estate gifts. There's none of the requirements that go with tax-exempt bonds we are limited by. We need to have Catholic taxable bonds. Secured, they're flexible, they're faithful. By doing a master indenture over a diocese and having the blessing of the bishop or the organization that's sponsoring, we can ensure that every loan under there is faithful to the Catholic tradition and doesn't have anything contrary to Catholic canon law, of which when we go around the country now stripping off these tax-exempt bonds with these toxic swaps attached to them, we're finding all kinds of canon law violations imposed by the other lenders. We don't need to do that. We can make them liquid. They could be issued either as private bank bonds, which have a liquidity to it, or they could be as public bonds, in which any parishioner could hold one in their fidelity account as small as $1,000 type sizes. They can be abundant. These can finance just about anything. And so we now have the last point of this is they can be donor friendly. In other words, we can issue bonds from the get-go that are intended to be friendly to a donor, a Catholic parishioner, to donate the interest back or the principal, systematically knowing upon issuance that we're having a certain amount of it coming back. You could actually borrow, build your structure, and have the bonds forgiven, if done right. So what is a conduit mortgage bond? Now here's where I'll talk about the first development. We built off using the Diocese of Phoenix as a partner in the Catholic Church today. There is something called, they call the diocesan bank. It's a diocesan deposit and loan. Essentially each diocese has a little bank. I'd briefly describe it. If anyone's seen the movie It's a Wonderful Life with George, it's the building and loan, but worse. It basically has taken the deposits from the parish, it has lended all the money out, and it's in the ground. So the deposits are illiquid. So if the parishes really came back and said, hey, can I have my money back? Remember the scene? They'd have to say, nope, we really don't have it. It's in his church. It's in his church. It's that story. Why I say it's a little bit worse is they aren't even secured. There's no mortgage. So that's the current bank structure we have. It's the building loan. The deposits are illiquid, and the bonds are bankruptcy exposed. So, building off of that structure with Phoenix, we did one little move. My laser pointer here has a tiny dot that I don't believe anyone could see. Oh, see up over that loan? Basically, this is the normal loan that the DNL is doing now to its parishes. All we do by adding a conduit in here, and let's simplify this, and there's deeper information on my business card on this, is if we insert a conduit issuer in between that loan, we now have run it through that process to make it that freely tradable public bond that I talked about. That's all a tax-exempt bond is it's running the money through a municipality who stamps it for a moment and passes the loan down. If we run it through our own Catholic conduit, we now have a different kind of bond altogether. And all of those arrows up there, that's what that means. Now, all we did in Phoenix, and I'll explain some of the advantages to this structure is when you run it through this structure, rather than lending out 100% of the money, they get the deposits in, they lend 100% of each loan out, like George in It's Wonderful Life. I'm not criticizing, that's just the kind of bank that had been developed. They can only make, with $4 million of capital, they can only make $4 million a loan. And when they're short of deposits, they're tapped out, and that's the situation just about everywhere. But by simply opening it up to a conduit, and in this case selling 75% of the bonds through Coughlin & Company to outside investors, they were overnight able to increase in Phoenix the lending capacity by 400% increase in lending capacity. With $4 million in deposits, you can make $16 million in loans now. And the diocese basically just bought back 25% of the junior offering. So the bottom line is they increased overnight their lending capacity by 400%. This is just scratching the surface. There's 186 dioceses and only 2 of them are doing this. Imagine just that alone, the mortgage kind of bond capacity created. Now the interesting thing we'll get to is that junior bond they hold, properly positioned, is ideal donor inventory. So you have St. Mary Magdalene Parish case study on your business card. So if this junior bond is held up there, now we could go to an 80-year-old donor and say, why don't you buy this 7% yielding bond, and you get 7% for life, and you donate the bond back upon your death. 25% of the debt just goes away. This was how we figured out this could be a bigger opportunity, just in this structure, is how to place the junior bonds with donors. And you need to do that ideally is with estate giving. You get a high yield during life, and you forgive the bond upon your death. Where do I sign? It's a secured bond, so you have a mortgage with it. It's a good bond. These bonds are LTV and DCR covered at extraordinary levels. There are so many good loans out there in the church now because they're all doing the one parable in the ground strategy with 100% equity in all of their properties. So if they want to build a little wing, they go to the diocese, they're out of money, they don't do it. But they have a very, very safe mortgage bond opportunity, so we just don't have enough capital there. They're properly done. By doing this process, you force the parish to kind of go through its finances and show the cash flow available for debt service. It's a very good process. And to boot, we're not underselling your services, Keith, but the whole headaches associated with running a little diocesan bank on a skinny staff and making dunning calls, also known as collection calls, to priests who you can't fire if they don't pay. This is not a good strategy, but by having a bond trustee, you can outsource the entire process to them and create a secured bond. And the bond trustee does the little notices. It's just like a mortgage. And I'll tell you, if a priest receives a statement from a mortgage, from a bank to pay, that gets paid first. It's just how it works. That one gets paid first. If he gets it from the diocese, that one gets paid last. And guess what? The last never gets to a lot of times. So there's an advantage there. And you have these junior bonds. Now, we have a few remaining things that we're solving there too. On this structure, and I'll just say that those parish depositors, in this case, have not been fully immunized from the bankruptcy risk of the diocese yet. The way to do that is simply to have the parishes not make a deposit and buy the bonds directly. And they now have no more risk on the bankruptcy side. The other kind of problem with this structure or challenge is for a big diocese like Phoenix that's doing a lot of loans, they can justify the work to get this up and running. If you go to the majority, the vast majority of the dioceses, and we'll get to the Diocese of Lexington as a mission diocese with hardly not the same loan volume or the number of Catholics, it's hard and it doesn't really make sense to do all this on your own. What they're going to be looking for is, could we rent this capability? Can you give me a national issuer? We just run through that and I have bonds in 90 days. That's what they want. And I'll show you that's what we did. But the structure could be done at a diocesan level or up at a national level. And one other kind of point here is if you look at this structure, although it is good, and we love the work you do, Walt, when you place the senior bonds out to outside investors that aren't in the Catholic community, you've essentially lost that 75% as a chance to be donated back. Good, but not great. If this were to be 100% placed in Catholic-friendly hands and Catholic institutions, there isn't a chance to get those back and have some kind of donation back. So that's some work to do still. Now in this case, here's the success story. Remember, the story is when Joe started at Phoenix, he was brand new in the job and they had no money to lend, zero, and a long line outside his door of deals. And people were having mass in the gym, but he couldn't make loans because he didn't have money in the deposit loan. So by putting this new structure and increasing lending capacity by 400%, this is the number of deals we just did in 2.5 years. He made $35 million of loans. And this is what can happen if you actually go to outside money for us to make our mortgage bond loans. So there you have our mortgage bond, the new conduit mortgage bond structure. That's in our repertoire, so to speak. If you have a mortgage bond placed, though, the first question that whoever borrowed that money, and the parishes are the ones paying these loans, is they would have a question about how am I going to pay the mortgage bond? And the simple answer usually is it's from your existing cash flow available for debt service. And that can limit the ability to do a project because they might only be kind of raising money from their plate collections. They're not doing all kinds of fundraising or annual giving. And so they basically have a depressed ability to take out mortgage bonds that might be capable of. So we want to look at how could we, it would be nice if they had an endowment or an ongoing kind of fundraising activity that would enable them to easily do this and other projects. So that's where we have our Flex Endowment campaign. Now, this is a whole new concept, so any definition you start off with is going to be circular. I could tell you a Flex Endowment bond is a bond issued by a Flex Endowment Foundation, secured by a Flex Endowment. But that wouldn't help much. So since they're all new concepts, we have to kind of go around it circular. And my hero, John Cardinal Henry Newman, that Catherine Tillman taught me about, this is often how he went about explaining it in different ways so that I can kind of try to get the idea of it. And from there, we can start to come back and see what I mean. But let's start off with what we're currently doing and just look at our definitions. So we do have a word out there called an endowment campaign. It's usually not its own campaign, but it's sometimes included in a campaign. But really all it is a component, typically, of a capital campaign where they're putting a little bit of money in an account, and they're calling that their endowment. But it's basically, what they're doing is, they're doing a disconnected component to a campaign and say, it's nice to have endowment, let's put a little money in there. But the problem with that is it's stealing money from what could go to capital, and they need money. And rather than using estate giving and other kind of non-cash capital type of approaches, they're simply stealing from their campaign, and they end up doing smaller projects. That's all they do. They're not doing true structured giving and endowment type of funding things, which is planned giving, which is giving off of your future assets or upon your death or using life insurance. That's not at all. There is no such thing as an endowment campaign truly, where we're out going truly to get all of the things that you do individually for planned giving, but in a campaign setting. It's also typically a very narrow thing. These endowments currently as done are about fairly wealthy people trying to do a significant kind of estate gift or a structuring, and there's expensive attorneys to get it done, and it's all about kind of the big guy. But it's not been brought down to the lady in the coin level. There's no lady in the coin endowment kind of giving opportunity where they feel that it could really make a difference. And another problem with making these private kind of planned gifts is, I mean, let's face it, the gift comes to fruition when you die. Wouldn't it be nice to be able to see some of the value of your gift while you're still alive? Wouldn't it be nice to visit the parish center that you helped endow while you're alive? It's possible if you did an estate giving campaign where we do this on a broad basis, that everyone working together can experience their estate gift while they're alive. That's a goal. So what we're trying to do is develop a new kind of campaign that's truly an endowment campaign. It should be conducted preferably way prior to starting your capital campaign, because it's a lot easier to size your project correctly knowing you have a big whopping endowment coming after you. If you're afraid of that, you tend to shrink your project and you cut out all the good stuff. The stuff that really matters, you cut out. So you should start your campaign first. So we need something that should be starting first and should be fairly perpetual. And it needs to use the standard kind of structured giving that goes with traditional planned giving. It needs to have a broad-based turnkey way for everyone to participate in that. These are criteria I would say would be a true endowment campaign. It needs to be broad so everyone can participate. I tell you, it's disheartening when usually the strategy is, we're going to have a quiet period. We're going to go talk to the real wealthy guys. And if they say that it's going to be good, then we'll go forward, and everything they want to do is in the project, and then the rest of you pray. Now that is not really an empowering way to get involved with a campaign. Although it's say, nice, we'll do our prayers, it's just not tapping the potential of the lady in the coin. And so we're needing something that would be broader, where people can catch on fire for it, and everyone can participate. And then everyone together could experience the success. And there's something about it being a campaign. That's what a campaign is. Everyone doing it together with a goal and a deadline. And then you celebrate. We don't have that for endowment campaigns. So we are trying to come up with something that basically takes some of the individual estate giving, stock and trade items, nothing fancy, but making them available on a campaign setting with a campaign goal. And so it's going to be hard to define. But essentially, what a flex endowment program will let us do is use life insurance and the ability of donors to purchase certain type of donor-friendly bonds in order to buy up a lot of death benefit on life policies. I would say the simple way to say that. Now, how we get there, it gets there's a few more bumps and things we smooth out, but essentially, what we think about is this, is what if we could have, and we do have a case like this in the room. What if we are dreaming of having a $30 million endowment And we simply wished and prayed that we had life insurance policies with $30 million of death benefit directly owned, and we're paying the premiums on those so that we know for sure that $30 million is coming to us. That's what we're trying to achieve, a type of campaign that could do that. And if you had that in place, and you were able to figure out how you can pay those premiums, and we can do it from blocking and tackling, structured giving, piece by piece, that's a very empowering thing, to know you got a $30 million endowment coming, to know that if you pay the premiums, that's there. That gets people onto the campaign, knowing that's big. You need an anchor. So you create your own anchor with a large base of insurance policies, and we figure a model where we know we can pay those. And then you have people piling onto it with estate gifts and other things, because you have a true campaign. So that's what a Flex Endowment campaign will be. Now I have to get into what do I mean by donor-friendly bonds and how we use them, and I can only scratch the surface here. I have case study on a charitable remainder trust, charitable lead trust here, but I want to give you some ideas of if you take the expensive attorneys out of the mix and you basically have bonds available for putting into these instruments, you have a very, very viable way of doing an endowment campaign. And I'm going to glaze across the surface of some parts of it, but first let's talk about where it's been done. Good to know it's been done. We have a Cornerstone charitable foundation that has a school, St. John the Baptist. It's in the middle of Kansas, and actually Jeremy here, who has set up my sound this morning, is a graduate of the Tipton St. John's School. Small world. This is a school that's the Rudy of all schools. This is a school Notre Dame should love this story. There should be a movie about this school. Okay, first we got to have a hard story where it's almost impossible to do, and then they overcome it, right? So, and then also it's nice to have a story where if anyone else looks at that, they could say, well, at least we didn't have it that bad to start with. I mean, what excuse do we have? So here's the starting story in 2009 for this school. 142 students, pre-K through high school. What's that, one a class? I mean, they were told on the math to close a long time before by everyone. They weren't going to do it. They loved their school. Supported by, in a population of 3,800 town, that's a school system, pre-K through high school, supported by a single parish. No paid personnel and no donor database. Yet they started a foundation and said, we're going to go at this thing. And we ended up finding each other. And we said, hey, let's give this a try. Virtual, no annual fundraising. So this is the starting point. So we said, maybe rather than close, let's announce that we're going to have a $20 million endowment. And we're going to buy insurance policies on these very, very supportive elderly base. And so we went off at step one, and we were able to purchase, and the numbers keeps growing, but we were able to purchase $20 million of death benefit policies on parishioners average age 75. Now, it was a big thing to bite off at the beginning because that was $1 million a year in premiums. So then you had to come up with a way to pay the million. But at least we had the $20 million policies in hand. We had our endowment asset there. And what we needed was a flex endowment bond to give us a little leg room to get running into our program. It basically is premium finance. Now, flash forward, end of 2014. Here's what the CCFSJB endowment looks like. $33.7 million of death benefit. The average age is now down to 67 because they're insuring the whole teacher and younger group coming up. So we have a full integrated type of a program. They have issued $8.8 million of flex endowment bonds. Rather than not making a single grant, saving up, till the policies were all realized, they're now, we're projecting that they're able to make $4.5 million of grants over the next 25 years, just right into the budget permitted by the bonds. And after that, after the bonds run out and the expectancy of this pool is they'll have $17 million net free and clear endowment still. Now, Rather than being on the verge of closing, they're up at 162 students, and they've raised in this last year over $900,000. We're only projecting $350 a year, but $350 is fine for our model. They have the 2-time defending state champion in the Scholars Bowl. They won the boys' high school Hoosiers. Add Hoosiers to it. They won the high school state championship, and they were number 3 in state. They had a chance. I think they didn't have enough people to even play. They had to play short, but they ended up falling short at number 3. And they're looking to expand their campus. So I would say, if they can do it, why can't any parish in this country do it? This is not the easiest starting point. Any of our semi-wealthy parishes, or at least that have this type of commitment to their school, could do this. Okay, we're going to have to get through this part kind of fast, but I'll give a generalization. They issued $8.8 million of flex endowment bonds. So 2 questions. How do they pay the interest, and how do they pay the principal? I'll give you the general kind of, that's the question. So you have to first pay the interest to begin with. Because if you don't pay the interest, you never get to having to pay the principal. You're dead before you get there. So the first thing is, how do they pay the principal? The innovation that we have developed, and it used to be about a $500 million capacity on Wall Street before we could do anything close to this, is we have a conduit shelf offering capability where we can take down bonds, public bonds, as needed. That's very nice because you can draw them down to pay premiums. You don't have to borrow the whole thing. You borrow it as needed. So you have a shelf offering capability. And what we issue is long bonds, 25 or 30 years are ideal, that are interest only during the period until the balloon payment comes due. What that gives us is a lot of time where we essentially only have to pay interest, and we have to have an answer, which I'll show you, for paying the principal by 25 or 30 years. But foreshadowing, the answer is the state gifts or the policy death benefits will pay the principal. So our real challenge is paying the interest as we go. So you issue those bonds, and the bonds are secured by the package of donor commitments we have, the life policies, the estate giving, any kind of excess bond proceeds. So these are secured bonds, secured by that policy pool. So if someone were to foreclose on that and be able to keep paying the premiums, they could get the death benefit. So it's a nice collateral base. I want to point out too, when this bond is combined with a mortgage bond, it's the most beautiful bond of all, as it's a perfectly uncorrelated type asset. You have real estate mortgage, you have insurance. You have them combined in a bond, you have a beautiful Catholic impact bond. Interest payments. Basically, you pay interest payments through annual giving. And so you need to make sure that you implement an annual giving program to pay the interest. And usually, in this case, they went from 0 to $350. That's what our firm, Julius Capital, can work and put in a basic building block annual giving program. Most any school can do it to get to 200 to 300,000, and you can pay the interest on these. So they use annual giving, and then I'll just introduce one structured giving concept. The concept is a charitable lead trust. Example, if our goal is to pay the interest, and we want to basically find ways to do that, one natural way to do it is to have a donor buy the bond from the beginning. Say the buyer buys a $100,000 25-year bond and it earns 7.5%. So the school would have to pay 7.5% of interest. They'd have to pay $7,500 on that bond. But if you were to issue that bond off of the shelf directly to a parishioner, they essentially are making a pledge. They can enter a charitable lead trust where they, under IRS rules, basically agree to donate the 7.5 back for a period of years. In this case, if they were to agree for 10 years, they've made a $75,000 pledge commitment, basically collateralized and irrevocable under the charitable lead trust. They get a substantial current year deduction, and you can look at the case studies for what this means, but it makes a lot of sense. Rather than, they could do the same thing by making a revocable paper pledge, But for the donor to do it this way, they can actually buy the bond and forgive the interest for a period of years. It's attractive on all fronts. So when you do that, which I just described, you end up having the equivalent of low interest or interest-free financing for 10 years. So if you can imagine one guy doing it, imagine $1 million of this type of financing where you have $1 million, 10 guys doing 100,000. You essentially have 0% interest financing for 10 years. Now the credit card companies are good at doing this. They send you out the thing saying for this next year, will you do this, and then the rates go up. We don't have to even have the rate go up part, but why not sell the bond to the parishioners themselves rather than to the banks and send the banks the interest? Send it to the parishioners who need it. And when we found these long bonds, I would have never known this, but in Beloit, Kansas, when we had 7% bonds available that could support their church, but also support them, I had no idea how this interest rate environment is punishing our seniors. They are at 0.0.0 on their CDs, and they're really struggling. These are our seniors in our own parish not being able to feed themselves. And yet we're issuing bonds to the outside and paying that money to banks? That's wrong. If you know that we can issue the bonds to our own seniors, who can then have the higher yield during their life, and they can choose, possibly. This works not just for a senior, because in this case, the guy donated the whole thing. They could decide to donate 2 points back, 3 points back, to contribute to the annual fund. So that's what we can do by issuing these kind of bonds. So we have ideas. Normal annual giving, charitable lead trust is a good fit for an interest-backed donation. How are we going to repay principal? So the basic idea is principal payments are repaid by estate gifts, and now I'll introduce a charitable remainder trust. So when we use the estate gifts, the thing about having this long bond, remember we have a 25-year bond, and so we're looking for some kind of inflow of cash in year 20 to 25. We've already paid the interest on the bond, so now we just have to figure out how to pay the principal off. The perfect idea is estate gifts. You've got $10 million of bonds, $8.8 million of bonds. If you can accrue through blocking and tackling $8.8 million of estate gifts, and this is not expensive, kind of turnkey papers, codicil in your will, transfer upon death of your securities policy, no cost to the donor in a campaign, we need to kind of amass $8.8 million of estate gifts through 25,000 here, 25,000 there, maybe a big one, all in estate gifts. And if they're just a normal kind of a transfer of an insurance death benefit, those things, if put in the drawer in evidence, can be a perfect answer for paying off $8.8 million. If your average age of a estate giver is 75, they have an expectancy of 10 to 15, call them 90. And by year 15, most of those estate gifts can come in far in advance of a 25-year bond. Essentially, this is a new collateral base that hasn't ever been packaged in a bond, and it does make sense. You have $8 million of estate gifts, even with attrition, that's an asset that you could look to. Now, in a charitable remainder trust, it takes the same idea, but once again, it uses the bond. So in this case, we take the $100,000 bond, and rather than, the charitable lead trust might be an example, think of a 40-year-old. I'll donate the interest, but I want the bond back after 10 years. Because I have kids going to Notre Dame. I got to get those assets back so I can figure out how to pay for that. But they might donate the interest for a while. The perfect case for someone to buy a charitable remainder trust is someone who might be, imagine a 75-year-old. Maybe on fixed income, maybe facing some assisted living challenges, not sure about their expectancy, a little worried about outliving their money, but they would gladly accept this arrangement. Why don't we buy a $100,000 bond? I'll sell my CD, earning 1%. I'll buy a 7.5% parish bond. I get the 7.5% for life, and the school gets the bond back. So if the expectancy is 10 years, the school gets the bond back in year 10 and they've paid 7.5% for 10 years. And now here's the beautiful thing about that. That's a live bond with 15 years left on it. That's a real asset. They can sell another charitable remainder trust to the next guy, and they sell the bond twice. They've now issued a bond, a $100,000 bond, and got $200,000 in proceeds. Check out the case study, but that's like a concept to get your head around, is this is a live bond, and you can place that with a donor, get it back, place it with a donor, get it back. And these are kind of, if you are able to do this case, what you have is a true interest-only bond. Remember, you've issued a bond into a charitable remainder trust, which irrevocably is giving you the bond back in year 10 or 15, whenever the person would pass. In that case, knowing that you're going to get the principal back and issuing a new bond, school gets $100,000 of proceeds. They pay interest for those years, but then there is no principal repayment obligation on that bond. They can have it donated back. That's a beautiful thing. Now, we even got to the life policy death benefits. Remember, if we were to do enough estate giving, we could pay off the bond as is with that. But don't forget, we still have the policies. And we've been paying the premiums as we go. Now, anything that, anything that's left after we use estate gifts and charitable remainder trust, will diminish. If we're able to solve the problem with the charitable trust and estate gifts, we will get 100% of the death benefit free and clear. But even if we don't, we still have the policy death benefits coming in. And for example, in the case of Cornerstone and St. John the Baptist Endowment, they have $33.7 million of death benefit. And on their model, they still will end up with $17.1 million. And that means that the policy death benefits are still in place to the tune of $17.1 million. And it's nice to have $33 million to work with to pay off $8 million of bonds. Okay, now this slide is moving to step 3. So we have the mortgage bond, we now have the flex endowment bond. We have a way to issue them at the diocesan level, but I think the thing that really cracks the code here is because it's a little sophisticated. I mean, even a mortgage bond is sophisticated for more dioceses, but it's nice if we have some turnkey national issuers that are fluent in mortgage bond issuance and flex endowment bond issuance. And you could get it off the rack with this kind of value-added Catholic bond issuer, and you could have either of these types of bonds in 120 days. And if you did it once, you could then easily do it again in your diocese. And so there's a lot of arrows on this slide too, but essentially it's the same conduit structure I showed before. And it just shows that the collateral, if we have mortgage bonds and flex endowment bonds in there, they're secured by a real estate, and they can be secured by securities and life insurance. And so it's just an ability, and they can issue private bonds that banks could buy, or they could issue public bonds for people who would like to have a free CUSIP and a free trading of that bond. This is our national conduit structure. Cornerstone Charitable Foundation has done this. I'll explain some of the advantages, but one reason someone would be interested in this in the Diocese of Lexington as a case is some dioceses don't even have a corporate structure for which they can do a corporate bond. There's a lot of unique church structures out there, and there's a lot of difficulty in setting this up. So the ability to have a turnkey conduit issuer is tremendous, and it's a key to having big placement opportunity with institutions. It's a volume scale type of issue. So what are the advantages? First of all, it's attractive versus setting up your own issuer. Rather than 200 grand and waiting a year, depending on church process, 2 years, you could possibly have bonds in 90 days. You then basically, rather than paying the money to set up your own issuer, you pay an issuance fee and a facility fee to the conduit issuer. It's baked right into the cost of the bond. This is how tax-exempt bonds work. The municipality gets an issuance fee and sometimes an ongoing facility fee. So you essentially have the whole cost of the conduit structure built into the bond. It can be specialized. These kind of issuers have the shelf offering capability. They have canon law compliance built in. private and public bonds. They can do mortgage and flex endowment bonds. So this is the kind of issuer we see. Cornerstone is one. It's going to be attractive to institutional buyers because now you can have scale. The way you would buy a bond is you check it based on the issuer, the QSIP and everything. You would want to have an issuer that's done a lot of this, has a track record. And also then there's some fluidity between the bonds of a single issuer rather than disaggregated 186 different places. It's a known issuer. It also has this geographic and asset class distribution. You could buy mortgage bonds and flex endowment bonds put together. They're basically a non-correlated asset. You could have a nice pool you build out of this. They're secured and designed to eliminate now the diocesan bankruptcy risk. So even though we might be issuing in a diocese, it's structured so that the bonds are not structured to that diocese's. They're not exposed to that diocese's bankruptcy. More complicated way to say we do that, but we have security and we have some ways to immunize that risk. Now the future, and I see the future is these Catholic specialized issuers, like Cornerstone, but the natural kind of issuer is any religious order that has a whole network of schools. They should maybe have their own issuer. They should have their own issuer. And then there's some unique things they could build in, but they could basically have this as one of their offerings. And I'll even put a little slide out here. It could be the ACE Foundation could exist to possibly issue bonds on behalf of its network of schools. That's what you could do with a national conduit issuer. Okay, so now we have the mortgage bond, the flex endowment bond, the national issuer. So we have a case where we can put it all together, and we do have a success story using the Diocese of Lexington, and we have Deacon Wakefield in the role, but we have just completed a transaction in his Diocese of Lexington in which we are working with a grade school to do both a mortgage bond and a flex endowment bond. And I'll start off with the mortgage bond. The first step was they needed to refinance $11 million of bank debt. And what we did is we issued a new $11 million financing under this conduit, this master indenture that works with the flex endowment bonds. Now, we've seen the story. The school must pay the interest on the bonds. And they must pay the cost of the campaign out of their normal fundraising, and we're working with them to kind of increase their capacity to do that. Now, the bank loan, and there's some sophistication here, it starts out as a private bank debt, but basically we have an ongoing shelf capability to issue mortgage bonds to donors, to take them off the shelf and try to do what I explained in the previous slides. Rather than having the money owned by the bank, we can slowly convert it to donor debt. And we have the capability in our master indenture to do that. And so as we find donors who are interested in buying a mortgage bond, they can buy a mortgage bond in the form of the public A bond, and basically we can then pay the bank off as we take down. Now when we sell a bond to a donor, we're hopeful that's as part of a gift of some sort. So we're slowly converting the bank debt into donor-friendly debt and obtaining gifts as we go. Now the flex endowment bond, they don't have a bond yet, but what they did is what we recommend is they started with their flex endowment program 2 years before we're getting ready for our mortgage bond. So in this case, they will now have $12.5 million of death benefit with a premium expense of $250,000 a year by June 30th. That's basically the asset off of which we can issue a flex endowment bond. So we have a story now where this bond, this school in a different diocese has issued a mortgage bond, is about to issue a flex endowment bond, and now they've used both parts of our story, the mortgage bond and the flex endowment bond, and it's all in a diocese that didn't need to then create its own issuer. And they were able to step into this transaction very quickly, building on the shoulders of what we've done before. Now, I think if we can do those three things, mortgage bond, flex endowment bond, and an off-the-shelf conduit issuer, we can do a lot of bonds around the country. Just doing that, we could stop. We might hit our $1 billion goal just doing that. But I think that we want to go for the whole solution. We need to go for the whole solution. And I think the piece that's missing everywhere is the senior community aspect to a parish, where the very donors that we're looking to contribute here, that could be the estate givers, also want to be near their kids and the grandchildren. They'd like to be right near their church. The Holy Cross community has something very similar to that here. It's nice to be able to be where you want to be, near your school, near some of your friends, able to go to Mass every day, and have some volunteer opportunities that are kind of life enriching. That's kind of what we're looking for, and we need to have a senior care facility add-on to the parish campus, and that's what we call a Marytown. So this part is in the early making. We've been looking at this for a year or two, and we had to have the other three pieces in place, but we would look to be able to offer a Catholic senior living add-on. And we're working with a couple partners that have done these kind of things, and we're trying to figure out, and we are on the road to figuring out how to integrate that as another offering as part of this package. Now, what you'd have then is a womb to tomb Catholic community. You would have the possibility of grandparents moving back to their original parish. You know, moving back from Florida maybe, a little colder. But if you could be near your grandkids and you could go to church, and it could be even your original pastor now is a member of the same community because he's moved on and there he is, right with you. You could kind of draw people back. You would have an assisted living area with memory care and health care. A couple might go, and you never know. I think I heard this last night, but one of my friends said it's a bus stop with this couple, but we don't know who's going to get off on the first stop. So there's different kind of routes with your health care. Is you would like to be able to be in the same spot, but as health progresses, there could be a memory care facility if that's needed, but you wouldn't have to move, and that would be right near your parish, and you could be with people that you knew for a long time. It would be a great way to have a Catholic community. We need assisted living, and in all the volunteering and staffing and other kind of opportunities. I mean, one of the biggest things you see in the Catholic schools these days, especially in Illinois, where after age 50, the public school teachers can retire. And it's a big bulk of a lot of the great high school teachers are retired public school teachers coming in and doing a second gig. I mean, there's a lot of time left on the watch after 50. So we could have people moving back and being able to teach. And they could even teach each other, as I found out is going on in certain of these communities. Former teachers could teach each other great books. And it's just it would be a really great thing to have happen. Now, how much does it cost? We think that the cost of this project would be about $30 million. On average. A rural community might be much smaller. A city community much bigger. But there's a very, very active financing opportunity with outside financing for this. We need to make sure, though, and our role would be, that the way this project gets done is for the ultimate benefit of the parish. It needs to be integrated in so that it truly is fitting with the mission and isn't just kind of we need to have some Catholic-friendly financing in here is what I would say, or structure, so that this truly could be a part of the patrimony of the parish over the long term. And not end up being a project that gets sold off or something else happens. And so we need to have the right kind of financing and structure. That's where Immaculata and Julius Capital, we will come in to make sure that this kind of project, if we brought it in, it's a type of partner that we believe would do the right thing. And we would make sure that it was for the benefit of the parish. We could then do, if structured correctly, 100% outside financing. And it could actually be an income contributor back to the parish, funding that very operational shortfall that we're talking we have. So why not fund the shortfall with the proceeds of a new project funded with outside financing that's Catholic friendly? Now we're expanding campus and we're funding our shortfall. You see things like this happening at some of the universities, Newman centers, some other projects that come in that if are properly controlled, there's financing to properly do those, and they're a very big benefit. Talk about the new evangelization. So this is the thing that we need to get better at, bringing in the outside financing. But I tell you that what we should not be doing is adding this kind of project onto a foundation that's already faulty. And so we need to only place these projects, if we're working with them, in a place where they have a long-term view to having an endowment. There's a perpetual type of fundraising system in place, and the discipline imposed by having to issue a bond and pay for it is a very, very wonderful thing for a parish to have to go through. You really have to look at cash flow available for debt service. You have to think about things. Suddenly you have outsiders involved, you have transparency. And I think we go through that process, you're ready for a big outside project. If you tried to put a big project like this right on top of a parish with a faulty infrastructure without a lot of help, I mean, it would crush it. And so that's kind of the idea of us using a goal of only having 25 of these. That means we can afford to really look through and find out if the place we're going to place this project is really willing to do the right things. We could take this project to them and we could know it would succeed. So it's kind of a little bit about being picky. Because when you do your first replications, you want them to be success. But it's not, I don't believe, too big of a goal. If we have 186 dioceses in 10 years, could we not find 25 campuses that were worthy of this kind of a project? And if we could do that, and that would equal $1 billion, couldn't we see that maybe 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 billion was possible? If we could do $1 billion with 25 the right way, I think there's a lot of 5 loaves and 2 fish for us to have in these Catholic impact bonds. And not to mention, if we then have a senior facility, and we're in the business of doing endowment campaigns, wouldn't you think that our estate giving might go up? If we had a whole active, pleased community of seniors right there, right next to the school. There's something about fundraising. There's something about seeing the kids, seeing the church, that makes it real. I mean, calling someone that lives 200 miles away and telling them about giving an estate gift is a different story than if you actually had them living in a community where they could perpetuate the future. They could see a 3-generational future in their gift. I have a hard time believing that they wouldn't give that. Even without asking, they would want to do something like that. That's how we're wired. We're wired to give. It's an abundance mentality. It's not a scarcity mentality. We just haven't believed our own faith. If we build this, they will come. So let's review. What we talked about is a modest goal of 25 Mary towns with $1 billion in 10 years. I hope it feels a little more modest than when I first said it. Not that it won't be still nearly impossible, maybe even probable, but I want you to consider whether this would be something that all of you might be able to join in some way, shape, or form. We talked about conduit mortgage bonds being the first stage. Those are well developed. This is in place. We have a flex endowment bond that is now getting traction. It's fairly well developed, but it's the second leg of what we need to do. We have a National Catholic bond issuer in place, in which we really have worked out the kinks on a prototype of the first case where we've done a diocesan, a remote diocese mortgage and flex endowment bond to come. We have a proven model for some senior care add-ons. We also have St. Maximilian Kolbe's Marytown concept. It worked back in the 1920s. It should work now. We have providers. The key is to how to integrate this in as the next step of our process. And I'd like to just say, for the group that's been with us from the beginning, just thanks to those that believe from the start. Many of you are here. We value it deeply. You're a brave group. But if we don't swing for the fence, if you know the end of the story, swinging for the fence just isn't that hard. We know it'll work out, we just don't know how. But one thing that we know for sure is the wrong way to go is to not try, is severely looked down on by the Lord. He wants us to try. He wants us to try to double the modest talent we have. He wants us to bring the assets we have and give them a chance to work. We're going to create a new Catholic financial ecosystem. We're figuring some things out in the field. Welcome to some of you who might join with us to help make it a reality. We sure need you.
Schierl, now would be the moment.
Mike, at one point during this, you used the term that it was somewhat, I forgot the exact term, sophisticated, somewhat sophisticated. But I'm sure I'm not the only one here that looks at this as being very sophisticated in terms of the layperson's understanding of this concept. So isn't that one of your greatest challenges, is the education of those dioceses and others to be able to see this? And what are you doing in that vein?
Great question. Yeah, and imagine if you've never done one. So all I would say to it is, first of all, it is sophisticated. We do an enormous amount of work to put that under the engine. So it just, it works. So part of it is they don't need to know the sausage making process if you have a success story. So I think the big part of how we can do it is when we did a piece and it works, it's so much easier to say, hey, it just works, call Joe Anderson or whatever, check it. I mean, the more we have out there, that is easier. It's when you're doing the brand new ones that, when I talk about courage, you need some courage and a really smart person to combine to take this on in the first time. And I'd say you need a guy like Deacon Wakefield in Lexington, because this is a lot to figure out, to try for the first time. But I will tell you, Dolly, the second time, third time, you call 2 or 3, they've done it, they've had some experience, so it gets a lot easier after you've done the first widget. The first one, hard, yes. And someone willing to, you have to make some mistakes with them, like developing any new things, so they've got to be willing to be, that's why I put development partners. The first diocese to try these, really we're co-development partners. So I hope that answers. Yeah, it's sophisticated, but it's hard, but it gets easier.
One more.
John?
So what keeps you up with it? So as you're getting one of these started, Michael, what keeps you up? What do you think are the 2 or 3 greatest challenges and risks?
Well, I would say, first of all, everything we're doing here is fraught with risk. So, I mean, but you know that I believe that we should try to swing for the fence. So the thing that we're still, it's the thing that we haven't done yet. Once we've done it and we know we worked it out, I feel I don't worry about that anymore. I know that it's in range. But when you're trying a brand new thing, and so it depends on where we are with the project. Right now, if you would have asked me 4 months ago, I would have said, can we do a conduit issued bond out of Kansas to Lexington, and when they don't have a civil entity? I would have been up at night thinking about that, and I was for 3 months, how to structure it. But now that that one's gone, I get something else to worry about. It's the next thing that we're pushing the envelope on. And so clearly right now, the thing that I'm up at night, and I believe that we have to follow through on some of the estate giving commitments. But we've done one of each of them, and I'm less worried. So I guess the answer is it's the next thing we're adding that keeps me up at night. Right now, the senior care facility and how to do that right is what keeps me up at night a little bit.
Thank you.
Bye now.